So I'm Katja and I'm translator in the German language department of DGT, so the Director General for Translation. And it's always a bit strange to talk about MT as a translator, because often people think it's actually, if we use MT as translators, we replace our works by machines. And so colleagues are often resistant to say, but why should I contribute to this to make myself not needed anymore? But I wanted also to show how we are contributing and how we do use MT within the European Commission. So, yeah, as we said, it has been. We call it MT at EC. It has been developed within DGT, and it's a system introduced in 2010, and then we had a maturity check in 2011 based on feedback from translators of different language departments, and then we started a real-life trial where we used it in production, and then as of 2013 we started using it directly in our translations. And as have been said, the core is statistical data and statistical machine translation based on MOSIS, and it's partly improved by rule-based pre- and post-processing. And this has been a process that evolved in different steps. And so the data is the data actually that we start with our own data. Our translation memory is stored in Euramis, which has now about 1 billion segments. So what I always say with statistical machine translation, actually for me the machine doesn't really translate, it's a machine for recycling human translations. In rule-based systems, there is some kind of idea that the machine really applies rules and creates a translation, but in statistical machine translation, it's based only on the input that we the language data we put into the system. And as we said, the language pairs are English into all the official languages, and a total of 552 possible language combinations. Only 76 language pairs are direct translations. The others use English as a private language. So I just wanted to show you how the maturity check looked like in 2011. So we gave feedbacks on single segments of that had been translated by the machine, and as you may see from the graph, it varies quite a lot, and we distinguish different quality level according to the language pairs, and we noticed that MT works best for analytic languages, and it's more difficult for highly inflected and highly inflected languages. But so in German, as you can see in German, we are here, and we had rather bad scores, but still we decided to start translating and to start using it, and also seeing how we can make it better. And this was part of the process since the beginning, that that the feedback given by translators on the output was an important inspiration for improving the engines. And this feedback is given implicitly by the translations we sent back to the machine, but also explicitly we have given explicit feedback from the different language departments on what we want to have, on the elements which we wanted to have improved. And so since the beginning, the project has been open to the staff of the institutions, for the administrations, and to the universities. And so there's also been, within the project's MT@EC, different parts. So the first part was for use within the DGT as an additional resource while we are translating. And then the other part is for the staff in other directorates general, who can ask for machine translation and receive it as is, and then also as an input for the use for data portals. So how it is used by the commissions, by by our colleagues in the different directorates generals. They have this web interface that was already mentioned, where they can either send a complete text or have text parts, snippets translated. And when you, on this web interface, you have also a little indication on the expected quality, which is, you see by the, it's a little color code. It's a gold, silver, and bronze. So you can, according to the language combination you choose, you will have some indication on the expected quality. And then, since the end of 2015, there's also the possibility to get a machine translation directly from out of Word. There's a plugin, and also from Outlook, which is already, it has been taken up quite a lot by our colleagues, which is, it's fast. This always a criteria. How fast is it? Do I need to surf to the website, or can I just use it? I'm in the text. I want to find out something. I can click and get the answers very fast. So it's fast information, and this is often used for testing purposes. So when our colleagues, for instance, send big texts in a language they don't know at all, the machine translation will give them an idea of the content, maybe help them also to identify different text passages that are really important for them, and they will send then these parts only to translation instead of sending the whole text. And so this would be an example of snippets, like in other machine translation tools, as you might know from Google Translate, for instance. Then you can input your text. It can auto-detect it, or you can choose. You can tell the machine what the language is, and then you will receive the translated snippet. And so now I come to the part where I explain how we as translators use the MT output. For several language combinations, including English as source language, when translation request is sent, automatically also the whole text is sent to machine translation. So I have it as a resource that I can include with my other language resources when I work with in the CAT tool. And so there we have a wizard where you have all the resources that are available, and the machine translation is also shown there. So when I, as a translator, start building up my resources that I use during the translation process, I can decide if I want to include MT or not. I can later on then, when I see how it works for the specific text, I can disable it in case it is not. It doesn't help me very much. And we measured that now for about 50% of the projects that are created, MT is loaded as a resource, which still doesn't tell us if it's actually used then afterwards. But it's a broad indication of how much take-up we are. Yes, the take-up is, it's about 50%. And what's important also for us is to see when we translate, where does the proposal I have come from? And so in the translation tool, it's always when it's the segment comes from machine translation. It has a little sign for AT for automatic translation. So I know that it comes from the machine, whereas the other hits, for instance, can you see them? If it comes from our translation memories, I will have, for instance, 100% match, and then I'll know, and I will see here also on the top where exactly which text it comes from. And afterwards, even for revision, once you've stored your text and you've revised the machine translation, you will always still see that it initially came from machine translation. And then I composed some examples. So my preferred examples are in German, but I try to find something for you in English. So I I just took some snippets from French into English, Italian into English, and I think Bulgarian into English, and I translated these text snippets via the web interface. And as you see, I think at least in this case into English, it does work quite well. And this is the kind of text and kind of sentences in which the outcome is quite usable. Often when sentences are more complicated and the relations are more complex and the terminology is not very coherent, then the output is less usable. And I collected some typical errors. These are from my personal collection, so it's into German. And the typical errors that we often find in machine translation, the first one is, so it talks about the Federal Ministry of Health financing something. And in German it becomes the Federal Ministry of Finances. So there has been wrong disambiguation. So in German, first of all, the health has been lost, and finances, instead of being a verb, has become a subject. And then the other next example, he teaches rap to Roma children, and apparently we don't have rap as a dancing style in our training data a lot. So the only thing the machine found in the training data was RAP, which is an abbreviation for the regulations of the applications of procedure. So in German it became, he teaches the applications of procedure for the financial organization, because we're very perfect, to Roma children. So this is the kind of error. In this case, it will hardly get unnoticed, but it's the kind of error that happens, especially when the machine doesn't recognize an acronym. And in this case, it's the other way around. It thought it was an acronym while it wasn't. And then the third example is an example where actually something got lost. In English, we have two verbs, and in German, we have very nice sentence which sounds very convincing, but actually since one verb was lost, the meaning is completely different. So this is a case we have less in German, where you have something that looks completely perfect, but where the content isn't correct. This is more a problem for other languages where the output is very good. For instance, into Portuguese, into Romanian, I think the results are very good. Then the translators find themselves with very nice sentences, complete sentences with which are correct as a sentence. There is a verb, it's in the right form, but actually something got lost in the meaning. So this is actually the post-editing effort is even higher than when you have evident errors. And yes, about the developments that have been, the improvements that we have had since 2013, also thanks to our explicit and implicit feedback, has improved the generation, the MT engine. So apart from having more data, there has been some rules that have been included. We have given feedback on preferred formatting. So, for instance, that now when we get the machine translation into German, we have already the right quotes, and not the English straight quotes, but we have the smart quotes that we want to have in German. All these little aspects which make our work easier and speed then translation up. And so within the language department, in the German language department, and I think it's similar to the experience of other language departments, we are also seen a learning curve. So first, there was often resistance because actually post-editing machine translation is quite different from revising human translation because of the types of error that will occur. For instance, as I said in the examples, in a human translator wouldn't forget a verb or is less likely to add something, whereas the machine is. So the attention and the way of correcting and using with machine translation is quite different. And so it needs also some time to adapt to this. And so we often ask, so we regularly ask our colleagues what are the benefits they see from machine translations and how their experiences are. And as advantages and added value, they often mention lexical inspiration, because they will also get translation results, or the machine will work with input from other translators. So you will use words that you spontaneously might not be the first, your first choice. And then you get within the machine translation for German, because we less often have complete sentences which are correct, we have usable phrases and sentence parts that we can then shift around. There's less typing because of this, so this helps speed up translation work, and for technical texts, often the terminology is very good. The disadvantages and the difficulties mentioned by our colleagues is that they don't like the shift from actual translating to post-editing. Many colleagues say, yeah, there's so little left to really just translate from scratch, because we reuse so much of our previous translations that I'm really happy when I have something that's left for translating, and I don't want to be distracted by the machine. And yeah, as I said, this editing output, it's a different kind of attention. You need to pay attention to declinations and verb forms, to the completeness, negations, and additions and omissions that happen, and typical errors that are produced by the machine, which we would not find in a human translation. We also noticed that because of this, there's a higher need for revision. So the person rereading our work often find more mistakes when we have used machine translation than when we've been only translating as with human translation. And yes, the other example mentions that the usability is output varies according to the language pair, and also according to the quality of the original. So often we don't know beforehand how useful the machine translation will actually be in a specific text. So during these last years, we noticed that for us, machine translation works well, for instance, for press releases, for reports, for general communications. So in general, for texts where we have a lot of data already in our training material, which we less tend to use it for legal acts and in general texts which require a high degree of legal and conceptual accuracy. There often we have so many guidelines. We need to have a certain term because it was used in the previous regulation, and then in these cases our colleagues prefer not to use the machine output. So I would say the experiences of the last years have shown that the take-up is slowly is taking up, and we always had the approach of not making the use of machine translation an obligation. It's a possibility, and so we count on the pull effect. And when it works, people are happy to use it, and so we regularly inform about the improvements. Now we have about twice a year there's a new engine with improvements. So now we are at the 11th generation of MT engines, and so every time something has been improved in the meanwhile. And so people really start using it in a selective way for the texts for which it makes sense, and also in the context in which it makes sense. And then on the other hand, this means that speeding up work for some texts gives us more the possibility to focus also on the texts that really need to be translated from scratch by human translation, because it's a speed, or because there are lots of citations, or because we do not have a lot of material in the training data. So we, in many cases, we do rely on machine translation where we need to be fast, and for the texts where it proved to be useful. Yeah, this is my conclusion for the time being. I'm happy to answer any questions or to tell you more about our experiences. Yeah, there's a question.
Yes, I would like to ask you. You said that you have set certain rules. Regarding what?
For instance, there have been rules about reordering. They tried, for instance, to reorder the word order of the original, so that the output is better. For instance, there were tests done, but this is an example which then finally they didn't use, but it was because often in German we have the verb at the end, so the machine doesn't find the word because it's looking in the wrong place. So they applied rules where they made the word order in the English text closer to where closer to the German language model. This is, for instance, a rule. Or we also put out placeholders. For instance, directive EU number, well, so we have compositor, which then we take out completely, and we define the translation of these text parts, which will be then afterwards re-injected as is. These are, for instance, rules. Thank you. Any other questions?
Yes, thank you. That was really an interesting presentation. I was wondering whether you have more data on the uptake. So this now is an experiment that ran for 3 years. What is your feeling in the uptake of the technologies by the translators, also in the other departments? Do you see that this is going up, or is steady, or it needs an important improvement to?
I think it's slowly slowly going up, and interestingly enough, so during the language weeks, where the language department could have give feedback on general output or language-specific issues, it turned out that more or less 50% of the translators, DGT-wide, with big variations between the language department, use machine translation. And funnily enough, when they started measuring in how many projects MT is included, we also end up with about 50%. And now we start to measure how, where the segments that we finally send back as a translation stem from. And I have one figure which says it's about 40% of the segments of the projects where MT has been used stem initially from machine translation. Yeah, so this means that then of course afterwards you can measure even more, like how much of the initial MT segment is kept in the end. But for now this isn't measured. So, and I think the uptake is steadily going, and it's growing with the quality. And interestingly enough, we are always surprised. Sometimes, apparently the Estonian colleagues, which are in the group where we don't expect very good results, suddenly have good translations. We sometimes, so this is why we also encourage our colleagues to retry, when there's a next generation, after some time, to try it out again. In the beginning, in German, for instance, we were very reluctant. We say, well, why should we start with a real-life trial if we have only 30% of matches which are interesting for us? But then when we see that something has been improved, then we tell our colleagues again, please use it, have a look at it, and then it works by the word of mouth. If I use it and I say, oh, how did you manage to get this done so fast? It was impossible to keep the deadline. And your colleagues say, well, I use machine translation. And some people, yeah, and if it's fit for the text, then it works. And some colleagues now are so much used to it that they said, oh, I get it. If I have an empty segment, I don't know what to write anymore. They prefer to work with machine translation. So I think it's really when the quality is higher, the uptake is higher, and so the continuous. So it's like a it's a virtuous circle, because with our feedback we improve, and when it gets better, then more translators will use it. And any other questions before I leave? Okay.
Thank you.